context of our interests in the Spratlys Islands. I just have a few questions. When we went to the Spratlys, their speaker, General Sabat, the commander of the Western Command, told us that one of the biggest mistakes that we made was to sign on to the Joint Maritime Seismic Understanding, the JMSU. And
I just ask if I stop. Show the JMSU here.
Yes, and we were wondering, Mr. Speaker, Dick Golding, why did the Philippines agree to this understanding and this exploration? And I would just like to ask if this was related to certain internal events in the Philippines, in your view, because the last 9 years saw extraordinarily accommodating foreign policy towards China. And this also saw a period when there were all sorts of contracts being signed with the People's Republic of China. I remember one of the committees that we had on good governance, looking at the cost of purchases. And I remember our colleague, then chair of the Good Governance Committee, Congressman Roilo, in fact, noticing that there was just too many contracts and that it seemed like they were all coming from China. I was just wondering whether this JMSU deal was also related to internal domestic economic agreements that were being forged with China, and was this not in fact a betrayal of the national interest that was happening at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Distinguished colleague from Mr. Speaker, when the JMSU became public, I was one of those who condemned it immediately. In fact, I conducted a number of meetings. Who takes this picture? Was one of the pictures used in my media briefings to show the world and to the members of the House of Representatives and media the possible sellout that may have happened. I would not want to be speculating in linking the contracts that are distinguished from a Bayan mentioned to the JMSU. But let me talk about the JMSU alone. The JMSU is an agreement not among 3 governments, but among 3 state oil companies. The State Oil Company of Vietnam, the State Oil Company of China, and the State Oil Company of the Philippines, which is PNOC. I even had a talk with the president of the PNOC, who was the signatory of this. He even appeared on TV. And you know what happened here? The agreement was such that the survey would be conducted by a Chinese vessel, a Chinese survey, because they're the ones who have the capability. And they will survey the area bound by the JMSU area. The data would be transferred somehow. There's so many transfers of the data, but in the end, the final analysis will be done by China because they have the technology for the analysis of the data that will be recovered from this survey. This is a marine survey, you look at the bottom, but I understand that this survey also indicates the seismic investigation that would indicate whether there is oil in the area or not. The other possibility is the mapping of the area for possible use by submarines, because a lot of the area is still uncharted and unmapped, and therefore very dangerous for submarines. Now you can see here, Mr. Speaker, the blue line is the line of our exclusive economic zone. The exclusive economic zone is from the blue line all the way to the coast of Palawan. And you can see Palawan there. The red line, the figure indicated by the red line, is the JMSU area. That was where the survey was conducted, and you can see that most of that is within our exclusive economic zone. My first statement then was, why are they going to survey and then possibly partition by way of a joint development an area within our exclusive economic zone when under UNCLOS the natural resources there are ours? Why partition our natural resources? If it were a JMSC that would cover the entire South China Sea, then there would be, and if we're talking in equitable partitioning, we have a share of the natural resources in Vietnam, in China, in Malaysia, then that would sound fair. But why, bakit yung lugar lang natin ang pinaghahati? That is where I consider it really anomalous and quite sell out, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues. Now, we don't know what kind of data has been gathered, what kind of sensitive data has been gathered. We don't know whether they already have evidence, geological evidence, that there is indeed oil there, and up to what quantity. Because I understand from my discussion with scientists that a seismic survey can give an indication on the oil reserve.
Thank you, dear colleague, Mr. Speaker. I think this is really critical, and that I hope that our executive department, in fact, learns about how not to make agreements like this that put us in a very bad position. Para mapraisahan tayo dito. At I really hope that the current administration, and I've been following the statements also of Foreign Secretary Del Rosario. It seems like we are coming back to a situation where we become quite vigilant and are very straightforward in terms of our warnings to the Chinese government. I asked our dear friend from Lupa would also want to ask questions, so I would just want to limit it to 2 other questions, Mr. Speaker. This is with respect to your views about our force structure at this point. Really, distinct gentleman from Paranaque, that we should be focusing our build-up and our military spending on the Navy at this point in time.
Well, this is something that needs a deeper discussion, but offhand, considering that we're starting from almost nil, it goes without saying that whether there's a Spratlys situation or not, we really needed to beef up our naval capability and also our air force capability with respect to the external threat, not tomorrow, but yesterday.
Yes. I raised this because I was looking at the figures, Mr. Speaker, in terms of our allocations for the Navy, and I was just wondering that for 2012, we have 3.8 billion pesos allocated compared to 2011 of 20.6 billion, and this is just a rise of about 4.4%. While our public officials, Malacanang, has in fact been saying that the threat in the South China Sea really demands that we pay attention to beefing up our naval forces. In other words, I do not see reflected in the budget the urgency with which our naval forces should be built up. Would you agree with this?
I fully agree with the speaker's colleague. But there are other ways of really expanding and upgrading our capability. That may be the budget, but if we use the budget and leverage this amount, let's say 5 billion, 2.5 billion, leverage the amount in a multi-year contract. It's like person, for example, instead of trying to save money over several years, you have an amount that you can use for down payment, use the down payment, leverage it, borrow money. That strategy can be used. In fact, 2 years ago, we already discussed that in the previous Congress. The then chairman of the Committee on Appropriations, Judy Kua, on the suggestion of this presentation, and I'm thanking for that. And with the Secretary of National Defense and with the heads of the major services, including the Chief of Staff, to draw a strategy for a multi-year contract. And it is now, in fact, reflected. It is something that can be done already. So instead of buying finished all items for, let's say, 3 or 5 billion, which would not amount to so much, use that money as the annual amortization for a big one-time acquisition of big-ticket items like ships that are capable of controlling the Spratlys area, fighter planes that are capable also of projecting our defense capability in the area as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that it would be great if we could utilize the budget hearings precisely to discuss the more broader issues of our defense capabilities, and certainly your contribution in the hearings around this is important. The only last thing I would ask, Mr. Speaker, is, dear colleague, should we not be relying more on ASEAN rather than the United States in terms of our efforts to deal with China in the South, in the West Philippine Sea? I raise this because there are many of us, I believe, who are apprehensive about what China is doing, but would prefer to rely more on ASEAN, and were a bit disturbed by the immediate rush to the United States that occurred about a month and a half ago. Would you have any comments on this? Should we not, in fact, be more forging an alliance, a strong alliance with ASEAN vis-a-vis the China, rather than running immediately to the United States? I'm just worried that this immediately converts the issue into superpower confrontation rather than a real peaceful effort to resolve this issue.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's the reason why in my speech I also became the powers of the area of the West interested. One of them, Vietnam, Indonesia, included, these are ASEAN entities. But I understand from analysts that there may be a bifurcation of ideas within the ASEAN. Some are China leaning. They mentioned Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar. Some may be US leaning, Vietnam as emerges as one of them. Some may be independent, like Indonesia, who may have the capability for independent foreign policy because of its size, economically, population-wise, as well as military-wise. But in the opinion of this representation, it would be wise to explore all possibilities. In international relations, especially when one is confronted with a very dominant power like China, which is going to become more dominant. In fact, I don't see a situation where we are going to close the huge gap between the Philippines and China. It will even widen because China is jumping by so many quantum distances every little jump that we make. But on the other hand, it is the other way around with respect to the comparative powers of China and the US, where China is jumping every year by about $70 billion in its military budget against a $700 billion jump of the United States. You can see that there is still an apparent dominance on the part of the US. And we have an MVP also. So these are very The others will just remain out of the picture because either it is not they're not interested, they are not their party interest, or they are worried about the possible repercussion from giant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Dear colleague, I would like to commend you for the foresight that you brought to this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize Representative Roilo Golez for his interpellation.
Before we recognize the Honorable Gaso, we have already exceeded 1 hour, so we may extend the time of the privilege hour.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move that we extend the privilege hour for another 30 minutes.
So any objections? There is none. Privilege hour is extended by another 30 minutes. The Honorable Gaso is recognized for his interpretation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when addressing the issue of Spratlys, there are two possible courses of actions that are now being discussed. One is the military response, and the second is the diplomatic channel. Mr. Speaker, there is even mention of us having to procure fighter aircraft, combat vessels for the Philippine Navy, and other such requirement of external defense to improve the capability of the armed forces of the Philippines. And there is even a mention of the mutual defense treaty with the United States, Mr. Speaker. If we even mention these things, are we not allowing ourselves to be thrown to a situation that can only be not favoring the Philippine position? For example, Mr. Speaker, when I was the co-author and the co-sponsor of the visiting forces agreement together with the late Senator Cong, the Commander-in-Chief of Pacific Forces, the United States, issued a statement in Singapore where he said that our municipality of the Kalayaan Island Group is not covered by the mutual defense treaty. Whereupon, Mr. Speaker, this representation issued a public statement that if the Kalayaan Island Group is not covered by the mutual defense treaty, I was going to vote against the visiting forces agreement. And so 2 days after, Ambassador Howard came up with a statement. He note verbal from the State Department that indeed KIG, a municipality of the Philippines, is covered by the mutual defense treaty. But that was 1999. My question, does the gentleman see that this pronounced policy from the State Department is still in effect?
Mr. Speaker, my answer to that is that I am not aware of any mandatory statement coming from the State Department. In fact, I would even surmise that their position is even more strongly supportive of that, considering that by virtue statement of Secretary Clinton during the ASEAN Regional Forum in Vietnam. It was an announcement of the U.S. re-engaging itself in this part of the world. Prior to that, they were talking of Afghanistan, they were talking of Iraq, they were talking of Europe, but that statement was a very clear statement of a re-engagement in this part of the world. And if that is so, and this is the opinion of this administration that it is so, then that means that the statement of Ambassador Hubbard can be even more strongly interpreted as such at the present time.
I am asking this question, Mr. Speaker, not to say that we pursue that line. As a matter of fact, I would ask caution in reference to equal diversity because it is as if we are agreeing to a discussion of the issues along the military lines. Mr. Speaker, I would say that in the resolution of the disputes in the Spratlys, the battleground is not in the Spratlys. The battleground is in the halls of the United Nations. Because only the United Nations, in reference to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, could provide permanency in the resolution of the dispute. For example, Mr. Speaker, last year we enacted the baseline law. And in the enactment of this baseline law, your Congress, our Congress, the both houses of Congress, was very careful that the provisions of the baseline law is in compliance with the provision of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea for a simple reason, and that is if the dispute will be resolved, there can only be the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea as the basic reference, if not the only reference. And any baseline law which we are going to use if we find any protest, because our basis for filing of any protest relative to the dispute is number one, our baseline law, and second, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And the two must be in harmony. Otherwise, our protest may just be thrown to the wastebasket. So, Mr. Speaker, the question is China a signatory to the UNCLOS? That's one question.
Yes, China is a signatory.
In which case, in which case, China is agreeing that the only resolution to the dispute is referring to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Not that line, dotted line. Not that line, dotted line. Now, Mr. Speaker, your Convention on the Law of the Sea, or your baseline law, compliance with the UNCLOS, defines our baseline. As a matter of fact, it is compliant even in the determination of the longest straight line, 100 miles. So that we have to adjust the drawing of that line in accordance with the UNCLOS. Now, Mr. Chairman, if we draw, Mr. Speaker, if we draw that, because there are three boundaries that we are describing in the baseline law. Number one, is the baseline, which defines the boundary of the seas where we will exercise supreme sovereignty, complete territorial jurisdiction. 12 miles from that baseline is the contiguous sea where we can enforce certain laws of the land. The law on environment, our maritime laws, and our customs laws. Now from the baseline, that is where we draw the exclusive economic zone. Mr. Speaker, may we know if our reference is the UNCLOS, how much of our exclusive economic zone will be solely Philippines and do not overlap with Brunei, with Malaysia, with Vietnam, with China, and I'm not even going to ask about Taiwan, because Taiwan, if we ever have a conflict of definition of exclusive economic zone, the only probable conflict with Taiwan will be to the north, which is Balitang Channel. So how much of the exclusive economic zone is exclusively Philippines and not shared with any other countries if the reference is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea?
Mr. Speaker, I think we shouldn't even say if. There is no if here. Definitely, the basis is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. And if your eyesight is good, you can see the blue lines. These are indicative of the exclusive economic zones of the Philippines.
That is correct.
And the definition here, practice that the exclusive economic zone line should go along the general geographical coastline of the country, claiming the exclusive economic zone. So you can see that it moves west and east depending on the coastline of Luzon, of Palawan. And then now it bumps into the exclusive economic zone being projected by Malaysia to the north of Borneo. Then there's a small stretch which is the exclusive economic zone of Brunei and back to Malaysia. So that is the only place where there can be a possible overlap as far as the LGC is concerned. In the north, it will be in the Batanes area where we would be discussing fishing grounds, common fishing grounds. It is Vietnam that has an overlap, a big overlap with China in the Tonkin Gulf area. And that is the reason why the Paracels, which is almost at the point of contact between the exclusive economic zone of Vietnam and China, the Paracels are located there. That's why it's a very hot issue, because territorially, one cannot say just by looking at it where it is closest. Unlike in the case of the Spratlys, just by looking at the figure here, you can see that
Closest to us.
most of the Spratlys are closest to the Philippines. In fact, a lot of it is within our exclusive economic zone. And if we move early enough in the 50s, we could have had most of them within our exclusive economic zone, but we did not. Unfortunately, we did not move fast enough, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. But I fully agree that the basis here is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. However, it is China is invoking their originally the 11 last line, now the 9 last line, Spratlys as an alternative for resolution?
President, the joint statement from China and the Philippines indicate that there is willingness on the part of China to refer the resolution of the dispute to the international body.
I don't think so, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. I have a copy.
There was presented a statement kanina.
No, it was our side. It was our side that just iterated.
So this is not a joint statement between the Philippines and China?
But
Because, correct me if I am mistaken, it was impressed upon me when that joint statement was presented kanina that this is a joint statement.
this is a joint statement, but there is nothing there. As far as my recollection is concerned, that indicates that they just said peaceful means.
That's correct.
There is nothing there that I'm looking for the...
Yes, because this is important. For example, in the, while you are looking for it, Your Honor, it is important that there is a clear definition of terms. For example, the conduct, the POC document on conduct, signed by ASEAN plus one, meaning the ASEAN countries and China, with the first reference to the joint statement.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the joint statement goes as follows. Upon the invitation of the Chinese Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi, Secretary of Foreign Affairs Albert Rosario, paying an official visit, the two sides made a positive assessment of the progress made over the past 36 years since China and the Philippines established diplomatic relations. They agreed that maintaining healthy and stable development of bilateral ties serves the fundamental interests of the two countries and meets the common aspirations of the two peoples. They reviewed the progress and implementation of the Joint Action Plan for Strategic Cooperation signed on October 29, 2009. The two countries will maintain close political cooperation including high-level visits and defense and security cooperation. Both sides discussed forthcoming state visit. In the economic and trade area, both sides agreed to continue to enhance trade and investment. They furthermore agreed to enhance cultural and people-to-people exchanges, including twinning or sister city arrangements. Both ministers exchanged views on the maritime disputes and agreed not to let the maritime disputes affect the broader picture of friendship and cooperation between the two countries. The two sides reaffirmed their commitment to respect and abide by the declaration of the conduct of parties in the South China Sea signed by China and the ASEAN member countries in 2002. Both ministers agreed to further strengthen the bonds and friendship and cooperation. There is nothing there that they would agree to
Thank you for the clarification.
These are very general attitude statements of amity and friendship.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Speaker. Now, I will not go further. There are still a lot of questions we will have, except for the last one. Do we have a national position defined? When I say national position, where the executive and in principle the legislature are in agreement on the issue of the dispute in this Spratlys. Mr. Speaker, this representation filed a resolution urging the executive, urging the President, as a matter of fact, to convene the National Security Council. Because only the National Security Council can come up with a national position on the issue. Reason, the membership of the National Security Council includes not only respective department heads legislature itself. The Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and appropriate chairmen of appropriate committees in Congress are members. And I think if we allow the present situation where a complete and out of a public official issues differing statements regarding the Spratlys that we are presenting to China and to the other claimant countries in this united government. And so therefore, would the gentleman from Paranaque support this call for the President to convene the National Security Council so that we will be able to define a national position regarding the dispute?
Mr. Speaker, I once served as the Secretariat of the National Security Council when I was the National Security Advisor. And the impression I have is that when the NSC, the bigger NSC, is convened, not just the executive committee, but the National Security Council itself, consisting of the President, the Vice President, the relevant former presidents, including the committee chairman of both houses that are relevant to the issue. The impression I have is that there is a real threat that must be a security threat. For example, there was an NSC meeting on the Iraq situation. There was a Security Council meeting, not during my time, but when I was the Committee on Public Order Chairman, during the incident in Mindanao, when Lano del Norte was attacked during the time of former President Estrada. So there was a real threat, and I remember the earlier statement of our distinguished colleague from Monteluma that we should not in any way allow people to interpret our statements as saying that there might be a military situation building up here. That might be, distinguished colleague, Speaker, the impression that we might generate once we convene the National Security Council, because people will say this is not a diplomatic issue, this is not an economic issue, this is a security issue, something that may be already emerging, a clear and present danger. In fact, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, that is my only hesitance in agreeing. I fully agree that there's a need for the body to discuss the various implications, strategic implications, but it can be done without creating the impression that the Philippines now see this as a security concern. If we can only finesse it that way, then I fully agree that a body, maybe not necessarily an NSC, but a body that would have the essential elements of the NSC so that, as you said, we can craft a position with respect to this practice, a position that, in my opinion, should stress diplomacy, a position that should stress that we should express in no uncertain terms our reliance on the UNCLOS process, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
I agree, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, this is one of my lives. That we bring the discussion of this dispute to the diplomatic area. That's why I was saying, the battleground is not in this practice, where you have to use aircraft carriers, you have to use submarines, and the Philippines right now, if there is no mention, if there is a mention of having to buy fighter aircraft, having to buy destroyers, having to invoke the mutual Tolerance Treaty, then that is talking about the military aspect of the problem. If, for example, the National Security Council comes up with a consensus, not even a decision, a consensus, that we focus on bringing the battle away from this practice, but into the halls of the United Nations, then the world will know this is what the Philippine government wants, whether we are talking of the executive or the legislature. So ito po ang conclusion ng National Security Council is to follow the diplomatic channel. Then that is the national position. And probably that is going to signal to the world that the Philippine government is going after the peaceful means. Basically, as if when we convene the National Security Council, there is war. No! Far from it. We cannot always be reactive. We must be prospective. And the prospective issue here is that if the National Security Council meets and come up to a consensus, we are going to follow the diplomatic channel. Then the world will understand. The public diplomacy will understand. Mr. Chairman, as a matter of fact, I filed that resolution in the hope that anyone who has something to say about the Spratlys dispute is guided by the national position. And if the national position is diplomacy, then I'll be very, very happy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I think in essence, the national position has been defined in a way that is diplomacy. The fact that I think the primordial statement that I keep on hearing and it's being repeated is the rules-based approach, and it refers to the international rules as defined by UNCLOS, where we have the decided ends, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think a compromise, I fully understand the very sound proposal of our distinguished colleague. My only hesitance here is that convening the National Security Council has a foreboding implication if we look at the history of all the times when the NSC as a big body was convened. Perhaps the compromise here, Mr. Speaker, is just to hold it as a cabinet meeting, but inviting key members of Congress. This has been done many times where there are so many vital issues, like for example, health issue, where maybe not necessarily that because we're not talking of a legislative measure here, but a cabinet meeting where this will be the principal agenda item, and the wisdom of the chairman of the Committee on National Defense of the House of Representatives can be invited there, and he will be one of the key participants in this cabinet meeting. But as I said, calling it an NSC, National Security Council meeting, may have a foreboding repercussion in the eyes of the world, and even with respect to China, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, the issue of the economy, the issue of food security, the issue of peace and order are subjects for the National Security Council. Anything that can lead to future developments is national security if it has something to do with any of those. Now, Mr. Chairman, maybe in the past, the National Security Councils have always been reactive. It reacts to the question, to the situation. Maybe it is about time that the National Security Council should be proactive to anticipate anything and to prevent peaceful means. Even China is saying peaceful means. And I think a stronger definition of this could be had if it comes from a consensus of the National Security Council. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague from Muntinlupa, whose views I totally respect.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize Representative Alberta from the 2nd District of Bohol for his interpellation.
The extension has run out already. The 30-minute extension for the time for the privilege hour has already expired.
Mr. Speaker, I move to extend the privilege hour for another 15 minutes.
The privilege hour is extended another 15 minutes. The Honorable Mandato.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the distinguished gentleman from Paranaque here for questions.
Very willingly to my paisano, Speaker.
At the outset, Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend the distinguished gentleman from Paranaque for his very incisive, instructive, and well-researched privilege speech. Now, Mr. Speaker, the distinguished gentleman has shown to this House an antiquated or ancient map showing China in relations to Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and the other countries. I would like to know from the distinguished gentleman from Paranaque, Mr. Speaker, if in the map, that ancient map, China Sea has been reflected or shown.
Can we show the map, please?
Now,
There. That is the old map, an Italian map. And the Indian Ocean is mentioned there, the Mer del Indi, or something like that. But if you look at the space which we now recognize as the China Sea, between the Philippines, the Indochina, and Borneo, there is no mention of the China Sea there. Mer de Chin of Chile, if the Italian language would be used. So 400 years ago, it was not recognized as China Sea, because the Chinese have been claiming that since antiquity, they had control of the China Sea. But even if that is correct, Mr. Speaker, that should still not be the basis, because the jurisdictions have been changed. If we would follow that, the Indians will still claim the entire America, including Canada and even some parts of Mexico will claim Texas and most of California. The Greeks, the Romans, will claim the European mainland all the way to the English Channel, and Macedonia will even claim part of India and Pakistan, since Alexander the Great reached that territory. And the Persians will claim so many places, Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Mongolia, etc., etc. So even if that is true, that cannot hold water, no pun intended.
now, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the distinguished gentleman from Paranaque that the claim of China over this practice is based on its historical grounds. And one of that is not just its control of the China Sea, but likewise of its claim over the so-called Nansha group of islands. I would like to know, Mr. Speaker, from the distinguished gentleman from Paranaque if that group of islands is being reflected in the ancient map which has displayed before us.
Well, there are specks of islands there, but they're not identified as. By the way, Nansha and Spratlys, they're basically the same.
Okay. Now, may I know from the distinguished gentleman from Paranaque, Mr. Speaker, if the Spratlys group of islands is similar to the so-called freedom land which Admiral Tomas Ploma claimed for the Philippines and have it registered before the United Nations sometime in the 1950s.
No, Mr. Speaker, they're not the same, except that the original freedom land, now called the KIG Kalayaan Group, is within the Spratlys. It's part of the Spratlys. Spratlys is a long stretch of more than 700 islands, reefs, shoals, etc., 45 of which are occupied by various forces from different countries. But the KIG, we have the map of there. There. Those are, the Spratlys was named after the Spratly Island, which is an island, a relatively big island, located towards the southwest of the Spratlys Island group. And the KIG is located towards the northeast area, northwest area. So it is part of the Spratlys, distinguished colleague, Mr. Speaker.
May I proceed now to another point?
And the islands claimed by Tomas Ploma, Admiral Ploma of Bohol. This could have extended that as part of the Republic of Bohol, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, in the 50s.
Now, these disputed islands, this practice group of islands, which include Freedom Land, is it not in fact, Mr. Speaker, that we are agreed that this, or the bulk of these islands, are within the 200-mile special economic zone allotted to the Philippines under the UNCLOS?
Most of them are within the exclusive economic zone of the country. Can we show the map with the exclusive economic zone line? There. Note that most of it is within our exclusive economic zone. For the part of the Spratlys are outside, especially the part to the south and the part to the northwest, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Now, with that as explained, Mr. Speaker, it is quite evident from the peroration of the distinguished gentleman from Paranaque that on the basis of the antiquated map presented before us, there is no such China Sea, which has been used as the anchor of the claim of China over the disputed islands, group of islands known as Spratlys. And most of these islands are within the 200-mile special economic zone of the Philippines. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I agree fully with the position taken by the distinguished gentleman from Paranaque and Congressman Biaso that the issue should be elevated to the United Nations for settlement under the principle which the Philippine Constitution enunciated of pursuing peaceful settlement of disputes on matters affecting international relations. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would like again to congratulate the distinguished gentleman from Paranaque for his very enlightening and instructive discussion on the burning issue of the day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague from Bohol. Thank you, Mr.